One of my favorite things in the world to do is watch Friends. I know it's been off for years and years. It's not even around, but I still find myself binge watching old episodes. And I was thinking about this today and thinking, it's the predictability of the friends in the circle, right? You have Chandler with his quirkiness, Monica with her type A of just everything has to be so neat and tidy and organized. It's Phoebe's ability to make you laugh at her silly songs. Ross always comes in with those smart comments, and Joey and him and his food, like it is just so hilarious. And of course, Rachel, she just brings everybody together, and it's just such this beautiful, cohesive team of people. And it's why I wanted to come on and share with you today that I have an opportunity for you to find your friends in the content creation space. So if you are thinking about creating your first or your next digital course, I don't want you to miss this opportunity because Amy Porterfield just opened the doors for registration for her Course Confident Bootcamp. And I'm actually offering a special bonus for anyone that registers for the Course Confident Bootcamp through my special link. So I want you to go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register. That's crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And what you're going to find when you get there is I have this special bonus private podcast series. It's called Money Mindset for Creators. So I want you to go register for Amy's bootcamp, download the podcast, and immediately start listening to it, because what this training is set up to do is to help you get your mind right about monetizing your content, making money so that you can fuel your content creation dreams. So go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register for Course Confident. And I cannot wait for you to find your friends and find the people that will be there for you. Do you see what I did there? Yeah, nice little friends segue connection. Go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And I cannot wait to see you inside. Okay, let's get into today's episode. Before we dive into the meaty stuff that we are going to cover in today's episode, I wanted to throw out like a disclaimer that I am not advocating for either a podcast or a YouTube channel. That's not what you're going to get. So if you're in those deciding stages of your content and you're like, should I have a podcast or should I have a YouTube channel? Unfortunately, we're not going to come to any clear conclusion today. Like, I'm not going to tell you to do A, B, or a mixture of both. I just wanted to throw everything out on the table that I have learned about having a podcast versus having a YouTube channel, and how they are different and how they are the same. And this episode could be probably 3 hours long if we really wanted it to be, but I wanted to give you the highlights from what I know, having created almost, 350 episodes of this podcast and more than 300 videos on my YouTube channel, because I have a pretty fair comparison having done them, even though I've done them for different time periods, because I've had my podcast longer. I was for a while putting out 3 YouTube videos every single week. So that's a whole other conversation in and of itself. But I just wanted to tell you, if you're in the stage of making that decision, hopefully you will feel which areas are going to speak to you more, because I feel like it's going to be a different experience for everybody that listens to this. Some of you will really jive with what I have to share about podcasting. Those of you will feel really good about what I have to share about YouTube. And some of you will say, oh, you could do both of them kind of the same way. So why don't I have both? So I'm just going to leave it as however you come to your conclusions after this episode is up to you. I am not telling you one way or the other that one of them is better, but they're both so much fun and I enjoy both of them so much. So let's get right to it. Welcome to the Profit Podcast, where we teach you how to start, launch, and market your content with confidence. I'm your host, Crystal Profit, and I'm so excited that you're here. Thanks for hanging out with me today, because if you've been trying to figure out the world of content creation, this is the show that will help be your time-saving shortcut. So let's get right to it, shall we? So while we're on the subject of disclaimers and all the things we need to cover in today's episode, I want you to know that everything that I created for this episode, like all my planning of doing the comparison of what's different about a podcast and a YouTube and how they are the same, it was all under the assumption that we are talking about traditional podcasting and not from a video podcast perspective, because obviously those are two very, very different things. So the podcast is from the traditional sense, and we'll get into, that's actually the very first thing that we're going to talk about and how they're different. But I just wanted to bring that up in case you have questions about a video podcast. We are solely talking about a podcast from the traditional sense and a YouTube from the traditional sense of having a YouTube channel. So I hope that makes sense. Reach out if you have questions about it. I'm sure those will probably get cleared up here in a second, but let's just start from the top. So how are these two platforms or types of creating content, how are they different? Well, the very first thing right here off the top is a podcast is audio only and YouTube is mostly video. Mostly video. Do you see how I said mostly? Because sometimes people will kind of blur the lines of saying, oh, I have a podcast on YouTube, but really what they do is they take a static image of their artwork and then they put audio behind it. I'm not considering that a podcast. Okay, this is just my definition. You can use your own definition of how you want it. I consider that being a YouTube channel for your podcast, but I don't consider that a podcast. So these are the first two ways that I view them as two different platforms. So a podcast is audio only, YouTube is mostly video. The second thing we need to talk about, from the traditional sense, podcasts don't require as much work on having a visual component. So outside of a pretty graphic or a great soundbite to promote your show, like you could literally, and now let's be like, we're on the very most practical level when we talk about recording a podcast. You could look much like I do right now. I'm in a pair of shorts. I have a sweater on. My hair is halfway pulled up into a clip. It's still wet. I have not blow dried it whenever I got out of the shower. I have a zero makeup on, none at all. And I'm recording this with all the confidence in the world because you cannot see me. You cannot see me recording this right now. And that is the difference between podcasting. Like, it doesn't take me very long to get ready. Y'all, I could literally come in here in a bathrobe and my hair sopping wet, like totally wet, or in a greasy bun because I need to wash my hair. You would not know the difference because you cannot see me. Now, that is appealing for some people, and some people, they're like, no, we need to make this connection. I want you to see me on video. Well, then that is what YouTube is. Like, you need to work more on the visual aesthetics. Maybe this is like in your actual space that you're going to be recording. Maybe it means you got to invest in equipment. Maybe it means a new camera or a great webcam, or even just the physical space that you're recording in. If you're going to be sitting and doing a lot of like talking head type videos, maybe you need to rework your office or your closet, like wherever you're recording, to have a place that's not so distracting. I have watched videos where people are recording in this place that is just chaotic, and there's dirty clothes everywhere, and there's like just, it's total chaos, absolute chaos. And I'm just thinking, oh, if they could just clean it up a little bit, because I can't even concentrate on what they're saying. I don't even know what they're talking about because I am just looking in the back of like whatever's behind them and thinking they just really need to take all that to Goodwill. Or like they need to hire the home edit to come in and just reorganize everything and do a good edit and take some stuff to Goodwill or throw it in the trash. Like what, like that is all I'm thinking about. So these are the two different ways that you can approach these types of content is you have to work on the visual aspect more on YouTube, which that works a lot for some people. They are excited to, get really done up or wear a fun t-shirt or have, fun little Easter egg things in the background of their set so they can record fun content. But other people are like, I don't want anybody looking at me. I don't want anybody looking at me. I just want to sit behind my microphone and record some content. That's okay. One is not better than the other. These are just how they are different. But while we're talking about the visual components, not only going back to podcasting in the traditional sense, you don't have to work on as much because you don't typically have to do a lot outside of the promotion. Like you could literally just share your artwork every single time. But on YouTube, very, very different. Your thumbnails, y'all, we could do an entire episode on the importance of YouTube thumbnails and how sometimes I will spend 10 minutes on one. There will be other times where I spend close to an hour trying to get something just right. Just right. I'm like, I don't like that element. I don't like the color of this one. I don't like the text. Like this text just does not go with that one. And I want to have this background or I want this little icon. There's just a lot more work that goes into making it visually appealing, otherwise clickable, right? You want it to be clickable from YouTube or even from a website, right? Like you want people to have this experience of, I need to watch that. I need to watch that immediately. And that is just a little bit more work on the visual aesthetics as opposed to a podcast where it's like, oh, there's just a new episode. Like we can just go listen to it. So think about this. If you're like wavering between the two, which one should I do? There is a little bit more work on the YouTube in the visual sense, but this isn't a bad thing. This isn't a pros and cons thing. These are just differences. All right. One of the things that's different from a podcast versus YouTube as an audience typically will consume 80 to 90% of an entire episode of a podcast. Let me say that again. The audience consumes close to 80 to 90% of your entire episode. Y'all, I could log into YouTube right now and see how long someone watches one of my videos. And it could, like my average video duration, it could be anywhere from like 2 minutes to 3 minutes. Y'all, that's it, like 2 or 3 minutes. I have hundreds of thousands of views on my channel, and some of those people only watched it for 2 or 3 minutes. So this is a big differentiating factor. And we won't get into how to make your hooks better on YouTube. I mean, if you want to hear that, like reach out to me, DM me, and we can talk about it for sure. But this is something that is it's different. The platforms are so different because podcasters or podcast listeners, I should say, whenever they start listening, they're in it. They're going to consume. Maybe they can't change because they have, their hands are busy, they're sudsing up dishes, or they're folding laundry, or they're driving, or they're running, or they're lifting weights, and they just can't, they don't want to mess with it. Or it's like, you know what? I committed to this episode. I'm just going to listen to the whole thing. Whereas on YouTube, people are like, next. This one is next. I don't even want to watch this one. I'm going to do something else. So this is how I want you thinking about a podcast versus a YouTube. And then the next one is for a podcast. This is really important. And I love geeking out on all the marketing stuff. People discover new shows primarily by word of mouth when it comes to podcasting. Think about the last 3 shows that you were introduced to. You either heard about them from a friend. Maybe you saw them on Good Pods. If you come hang out with me on Good Pods, I'll have a link to that in the show notes, crystalprofit.com/episode 349. I'll also link to everything else that we talked about here today. But Good Pods is an app where you can literally see all the podcasts that I listen to. When I listen to a new episode, it shows up right there in my feed. It's like, oh, Crystal's listening to the latest episode of Smartless. She's listening to the Office Ladies podcast. Like it will show up. That is word of mouth marketing. That is me telling you, these are the episodes that I'm listening to. That's a podcast. YouTube in contrast, is very, very different because it is searchable. Y'all, it is searchable. You could go into Google and type in a question and you will literally get probably at least a dozen, if not more, YouTube videos that could possibly answer your question. That's a big deal. Or you could go into YouTube itself and type in the question and get pages upon pages of results that could help you answer your question, entertain you, do whatever. It's such a contrast from a podcast to a YouTube. Now, is one better than the other? I can't say. I mean, I wish that both of them would be incredible things because on the one hand, I think it's awesome that YouTube is searchable. That also means there's a lot of competition out there. And on the other hand, I wish podcasts were more discoverable. Like the big D word in podcasting is discoverability. People are trying to solve it. But I also love that word of mouth marketing works so well in podcasting because you develop loyal listener bases and they just stick around. They stick around. Once I find a podcast I love, I stick around. I listen to it every single week. If they're putting out content, I'm listening to it. So it's a very different experience between the two. And then whenever it goes, I wanted to circle back because there was one that I skipped over and it was for, we talked about your podcast, 80 to 90% consume an entire episode. The contracting fact that I had here for YouTube, did I say contracting? That's not the right word. Contradicting? I don't know if that's the right word. The difference is when it comes to YouTube, people may drop off if you don't catch their attention in the first few minutes or even seconds. Okay, I did cover that because I talked about YouTube hooks and if we need to have another episode on that. So cut that. I'm not actually going to cut this. I'm not going to edit that out. But it is something that I threw us off here in talking about that. I just wanted to cover how these two platforms are so different. And I'm just giving this information to you to do with it as you will. Now let's talk about how they're the same, because I think that these are just as important because I think everyone should have a podcast and a YouTube channel for different reasons. They just hit a very different market. They hit a different audience. And I think that people are looking to consume your content in multiple places. So why not show up there for them? That doesn't mean that I'm trying to get you to overcommit yourself. It's just my advocacy for both of them because I love them so much. I have a great time doing both of them. But here's how they are the same. You need to plan content for both of them. You can't just be willy-nilly, throw something together if you want it to be successful and you want it to be something that's sustainable. Highly recommend that you actually plan your content, have a content calendar. I'm going to link to my favorite content calendar resources in the show notes. Again, crystalprofit.com/episode 349. I have podcast episodes. I have YouTube videos about content calendars, but you need to plan. Whichever one you do, you need to plan. The next one is you need to publish regularly. You need to be consistent because that is how you grow an audience. You grow people that want to grow people. Y'all, I'm just talking all kinds of crazy today. You grow the influence of having more people follow you and really consume your content by showing up on a regular basis. So you got to be consistent. Whether you're going to do a podcast, a YouTube, or both, you've got to be consistent. The other thing that I really love about both of these is that either one of these can be done as solo only episodes or interview episodes. You could just do interviews on a live stream, or you could just do podcast episodes that are solo, or vice versa. It's kind of a create your own adventure whenever it comes to these platforms. But I love that you can either do it totally by yourself, or you could do it with a co-host or you and just doing interviews. So that's great about both of these platforms. The next thing is the editing style totally is dependent on the creator and their audience. So don't think that you have to spend hundreds of dollars every month on a podcast editor or YouTube video editor or on someone that is going to make you sound amazing when you're like, I'm really not that great. Your editing style, you could literally record on your phone, and that is not just for your podcast. I recorded YouTube videos on my phone for over a year. a year with the built-in microphone on my phone and my camera. And I've recorded podcast episodes on my phone. Like the editing style is totally dependent on you and how you want to create your content. And then the next one is show notes or descriptions for both of these are essential. I don't recommend just uploading podcast episodes or YouTube videos without descriptions. I don't think your videos or your episodes will perform very well if people have no idea what they're about. So you have to have that marketing piece of how you can talk about your own content to entice people, to get people to listen and consume and watch your content. So show notes and descriptions are essential for either one of these platforms. And then the last thing, and this is kind of like a nod to what we were talking about earlier with YouTube, like it's clickable on a website. Well, actually, for both of these, whether it's a podcast or a YouTube, they can both be embedded into a blog post or other pages on your website. And I don't think that people utilize this enough. They either just create podcast episodes and they let that just live independently on podcast players only, or they create YouTube videos and they just let them live on YouTube. I think that there's a huge missed opportunity if you are not embedding your podcast episodes onto your website or your YouTube videos, because that's just another way for people to consume that content. You're going to get more downloads for your podcast. You're going to get more watch time and views for your YouTube videos. So take advantage of the ability, the technology to embed these pieces of content onto your website, your blog post, or other pages where you want to connect with people and get them to understand your content, who you are as a creator, and what you're all about. But that's all I have for you today. I hope that you enjoyed my quick little podcast versus YouTube. Like I wasn't pitting them against each other. There's no winners or losers in today's episode. I love them both. They are just two very different platforms that I appreciate for very different reasons. And maybe we'll do another episode on how I use them each strategically in my business and how the content is slightly different when it's created for each individual platform, how I think about it differently, right? It's not the actual just audio versus video. It's how I sit down to plan these. It looks very different for a podcast episode compared to a YouTube video. So maybe that's something we will dive into in the coming weeks and months. But that's all I have for you today. So as always, make sure you subscribe or hit the follow button wherever you're listening to this podcast. Take a screenshot and let me know what you thought about today's episode. Tag me on Instagram. Let me know what you thought about it. And one more time, the show notes are crystalprofit.com/episode 349. And as always, remember, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere. Hey, Profit Podcast listeners. Thanks for sticking around to a little bit after the episode to hear this special message, because I want to hear from you. We are starting a new segment called Fan Mail Shoutouts, and I want to hear from you, and I want to hear your questions. What do you want to know? What questions have you been dying to ask me? So here's how to make this happen. Go to the app where you're listening to this podcast right now. Go there. I'll wait a second. Okay. Now, once you're there, you're going to see a hyperlink at the top of the episode description that says, send Crystal a text message. And that's all I want you to do. Send me a text. It could be casual, informal. It could be totally anonymous. Or if you want, you can include your name and the name of your podcast or content wherever you are creating, and I will give you a special shout out in an upcoming episode. So again, go to the show notes for where you're listening to this episode right now, and it will say, send Crystal a text message. And I cannot wait to hear from you and give you a shout out in an upcoming segment of Fan Mail Shoutouts.